Welcome back, everyone, to this episode of the Ambitious Dads podcast. I have the distinct honor of a wonderful man joining us today. His name is Prakash Raman. And Prakash, I would love for you to introduce yourself because you're going to do a much better job of it than I am. And maybe we can start talking dad stuff.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, thank you for having me. So I'm Prakash. I have a 96-year-old daughters, and we live here in Austin, Texas. Have done so for the last 5 years, and I have my own business as a coach, and so I think the ambitious dadding, I guess, would be a lot of probably what many people are finding is how do you define your own rules that fit for your family and what it means to show up as a strong dad to your children.
So let's talk about this a little bit. So first of all, do you work from home or do you work in?
I have an office, but legitimately, if you're back here, 4 minutes that way is my house and 2 minutes that way is the girls' school.
Okay.
So I sort of like design logistics to be as close as possible. But I mean, getting out of the house to an office is actually helpful for me.
Yeah. And so being so close, right? That first of all, that's a very different thing than our own parents' generation where work was somewhere far away than where we were. How does that create like this sense of things bleeding between each other, work and home? Do you take a lot of work calls at home? Do you take a lot of?
It's a great question. I mean, the nature of my business is that, there's at times there will be calls at home, but by and large, that doesn't happen. Usually the calls I'm taking are here. I'll tell you what the benefit is that I get to take the girls a lot, pick them up a lot, take them to activities a lot, which is really great. I get to pop by and lunch with my wife, right? Like, cause she's right by too. So that's really great. So in terms of sort of what we can create for our family, it's really wonderful. I also, the adjoining offices are two of my friends. So,
Wow.
So I tried to sort of create this way of like community that's logistically easy. The flip side of that is that because I could do those things, the blurring of and because it's my own business, the blurring of work and when I'm doing things with the girls or my wife or Ami and friends is pretty fluid, and I think that I find can be a challenge, or I'm a challenge.
So when you think about like they're 9 and 6 right now, so when you think about the things that you've gotten right about being an ambitious dad, someone with driven in their career and wanting to really be involved in fatherhood, what do you feel like you've gotten right? And then the flip side I'll ask you after is, what do you think you've gotten wrong so far?
That's a great question. My in-laws and my parents, I remember when the kids were born, they said, they told my wife, Ami and I, no manual for this. And, you probably never know if you've done it right. But you just keep trying, right? You keep showing up. I'd say right. I mean, I don't know that it's been right for, I think it's been right for them, but I think the right thing, if I had to say one, would be, I've tried to be intentional and said, like, what is it we value and how do we hold ourselves accountable to being honest about what we value? So if we value sort of a work ethic, then is that something that we actually are modeling? So I think, as opposed to saying, did we get it right with the girls? I don't know. But I think we're trying our best to model a set of values that we care about. And I'd say some days good, some days meh. So that, I don't know if I would think that's right. At least we're trying. What have we gotten wrong? Gosh, a lot.
First of all, it's just saying that out loud is nice to hear because we all carry that inside way more than we share with others. So thank you.
Totally. Like I feel like the sort of the wise response would be, well, nothing is wrong. You just keep trying, and you can't look back like that. But I don't know. I kind of think it's nonsense. Like I think about things, and I'm like, oh, wish I hadn't done that. So I think sort of maybe there are some micro things and macro things. Like I think um macro things were sort of, I think, spending a whole lot of time worrying about a bunch of stuff that like got in the way of, I think, and I just feeling a little relaxed as parents, and just knowing that the kids feel our energy. And so, and you hear that all the time. I heard that even before the kids are born, right? But knowing that we could show up with a lot of like worry energy on things that, whether it be oh, are they walking on time, or are they, and those are all things that are, not to say they're not real, but meaning creating worry based on a set of uh, guidelines thrust onto us, right?
Mm.
So they weren't things that we took those guidelines and said, okay, let us use it as the input and just keep doing what we can. We said, okay, it's almost like here's a manual, and it felt like a blanket. And I think any of the milestones that weren't hit were we would be like, oh gosh, we're worried about that. Um, I think in the micro little things, like when I would get upset with any of the girls about something, and I'm wondering, I reflect back, and then I'd write in my journal about like what am I upset about? Well, it turns out it's all about me. So I've made it about myself. And then it probably deep down comes from some level of care, but ultimately it's like some desire for control. I don't know. I found that those are my worst moments, and it's not like, I'd love to tell you it's infrequent, but I don't think it's infrequent.
I totally hear you.
I'd say the line is trending up in that it's getting better, but it's not infrequent.
Well, so there's so many questions I have. The first, on the positive side, on the like the modeling and being intentional, where or how are you being intentional? Are you saying these are our family values, or are you just talking through after you feel like you've done something that you want them to notice, or how does it work specifically?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what we started. We did some family values, and what I'd say is we kind of over engineered it, right? It became a mental exercise as opposed to something else. So, and I feel like, I both, I think, are a little more like, hey, let's actually see what it is we actually do model, and say, do we actually appreciate that? Right.
Mm.
So one of the things was about so some of the things we have is training your mind, body, and spirit, right? So like, hey, we do things like our reading, right? We go outside and we play. We for us, emotional regulation, knowing that that's an important thing, we try to do some of the things that are associated with that, and we try to model that ourselves. Again, my wife is like significantly better at that than I am. Like, she's incredibly patient, um, but I think we did that, came back to them, and then what I'd say is we have then what we tried to do is show our kids, like, what are the things we're doing, where are the things that we're faltering. So we may sit with the girls and give sort of like, I have a little habit chart that I create for myself, and like some of the weeks I'll show the girls and say, here's, I actually didn't do many of them. And this happens, right? Like, and it happens, not, it doesn't happen to me. Like I I chose. But so long as I know I chose, then I can ask myself, would I do anything differently next week? And it's I think, a really tender way for us to connect. Or if I do, get upset. I'm making it sound like I get upset. I wouldn't say it's like crazy, but I when I'm in my head, I say, oh gosh, we should sit and talk about that. Or when my older daughter is saying, oh wow, a lot of attention is going to the younger daughter, it's like great to be able to sit with her, and instead of say, well, but you got to understand, like you're the older one, and which we do that too. But I think there's a percentage of time that we try to model like, hey, can I seek to understand before being understood? I would say the values have been born out of like what actions are we taking, and then what actions do we want to take. Yeah.
I love I found it to be really useful too. Like when I screw up, I talk to my kids about it, and I tell them like, this is something daddy's working on.
Yeah.
Right. And in particular, um, like both my boys had some big temper tantrum issues, my youngest in particular. And we're talking tantrums that could go 25, 30 minutes. Right.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
couldn't outlast them for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
And when I would lose my cool, I would talk about it afterwards, and I would say, guys, I just want you to know, like, one of the things that I'm working on is being more patient. And like, if I'm like losing my patience and you don't understand why, like, I need you to call me out on it and help me.
Yeah.
And oh boy, did they do that. Like, that's like their new hobby. But I have
And
found it to be, yeah, go ahead.
all right, please, you found.
No, I have found it to be really useful because they see that daddy's not perfect, and he's trying to improve on like kind of core attributes of who he is.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if it kind of what the effect has been that you've seen when you've been vulnerable with your daughters around that sort of thing.
It's been just, I love that kids are such an honest mirror. Uh, so, I do like a daddy daughter sort of date with each girl,
Mhm.
and it'll be at a pretty high frequency. But one of the questions I ask is like, what feedback do you have for me?
Mhm.
Good, bad, or ugly? And it's really wonderful because as opposed to, how at work, there's a version of giving feedback that's like has a bunch of language surrounding it,
Yeah.
and you're like, I'm like, I'm not sure I entirely understand what you're saying. But like with kids, it's like crystal clear what they're saying, right? Like, so my older one will say something like, "Daddy, you know what? Like, you're really doing a good job at these things, and the thing that I want you to think about is." Sometimes when you get upset, it's like you're really, really happy all the time. And then there's like this small percentage of time that you get upset, but then it's binary. It's like she doesn't say binary, but she'll say it's this or that, right? And it's like great feedback because it's like that's pretty true. It is binary. So I'm actually my over the last 24 months, my sort of work has been how do I sort of find that emotions wheel.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
how do I leverage that to find the sort of in between kind of mostly happy, and then like, well, I don't know anything else but angry.
I really appreciate that. I actually the mirror part too. I mean, I asked my youngest son something similar just a few months ago, and he's like, "You're always on your phone," and you know what? Like that shouldn't sound like a surprise, but I really like I took it so personally because I felt like I'm not. But my comparison point is other people, like other
Yeah.
adults,
Yeah.
right? I'm like their mom is not on their is on the phone way more than I'm, but that's not how a kid is evaluating it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's just like the mirror. And another friend who talked similar to what you said, it was just like when you do snap, I just hate that tone of voice, right? And to hear that from your kids is just it just means something different, right? It
Yeah.
really,
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I had another one that was like, so the joke in our household is like, Daddy, you're so social. Like you always want to stop and chat with everyone, even if you don't know them. And it's sort of been a running joke. But what I find interesting actually after a point is that like both of our girls said some version of Daddy, you're like on this sort of extreme, right? And like the three of us are a little more like this. And so, but what I understood from that was they didn't always want to be out connecting with people, right? Like it was not their jam. And it was pretty interesting. It was good for me to know because I, I make an assumption that we would be that way, right?
Yeah, I get it. And also going back to, where you the milestones that we think our kids are supposed to be at. One of the things I hear a lot from ambitious dads is are these milestones about how their kids are supposed to behave in front of
Yeah.
extended family or friends.
Yes.
And of course, like the mile marker is not, I'm not looking for my 5 or 8 year old to impress anyone now. I'm looking for them to be like that the adult that is socially and emotionally intelligent, not the 5 and 8 year old that are socially and emotionally intelligent, because they're not. But it's hard, right? And I run into that becomes my issue, right? Not their issue, that they're too shy and they don't want to say hello, or um my most recent one is they don't want to look people in the eye all the time, right? And like you realize like that's not a them issue, that's a me issue, and I can talk to them about it nicely, but if I say it to them in front of the person, that like that's just for that other person, that's not for them. Like they're not.
That's so interesting. What a good observation. I wonder. A question for you on that is like, so in that particular example, um, I've often wondered if one of the struggles for us dads or moms or whomever like is, let's say that particular example, what is it you consider manners that you want to instill versus this is actually for external consumption only. You know what I mean? Or it's driven by external consumption. I know they're not there. It's hard to decouple, but I think that's part of what's challenging, right? Is like you may want them to respond because it's a question being asked, and maybe in your mind or my mind, that's like, hey, that's manners. But is it coming from the intent or from the place of what are they going to think, that friend, versus like, hey, I actually believe this is a useful skill to build, and I think it's an important part of who we as a Hittner family want to be.
Yeah, I think that's quite a fine line, to be honest. I would say though, the embarrassment that you feel in the moment is the wrong driver, right? And that
Mhm.
tends to be the driver that is sparking whatever comes out of my mouth in that moment,
Mhm.
right? And I also know, as as a coach and leadership expert, that there are times for learning, and those moments are rarely the time,
Mhm.
right? And so one thing, for instance, that I have done, which has found some success, is I talk to them before we arrive. Okay, we're going to arrive at daddy's friend's place. They're going to say hello. Just when you respond right away, can you just be sure to look them in the eye? And that's it. Like, if you feel shy, that's okay, but just try it for a second.
Mhm.
That is a learning point, but not
Yeah.
like, Riv, look him in the eye. He just asked you a question, which
Mhm.
sometimes I do, and I feel shitty about.
Mhm.
So I think it's that. It's like just a reminder of, especially kids, like they're not going to learn in the moments that we want them to make the change, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Absolutely. That makes sense.
yeah.
Makes sense.
Well, one of the things that piqued my interest in chatting with you too is like I felt like we had a connection on our own dealing with our own emotional dysregulation with our
Yeah.
kids. And so I'm curious because I feel like more dads need to talk about it. And I do my best to try to say, like, no one trained me to manage my emotions when my kid was, screaming and even sometimes kicking for what felt like an eternity. And I didn't know how to deal with it, right? And so I was winging it for a long time before I figured out like what it required of me.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious what that experience has been like for you, and what the evolution has been for you, and how you've learned to evolve through all of it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the context of our conversation was like, hey, that it's easy to lose your cool, particularly if they're not communicating, when they're younger. And uh you know, like you said, hey, it's not that what we grew up with was how to emotionally regulate, right? And uh, um so for me, I would say uh it really probably started as binary, as the girls gave me feedback on.
Mhm.
um, uh, and what I found is the binary of angry was more like, I can't control this situation,
Mm.
and we can't communicate in an effective way. I mean, my kids were younger, right? And I've noticed, sort of, if I were thinking about what has evolved, some is some of the positive that's evolved has been outside of my control, which is they've just gotten older and, obviously can emotionally regulate themselves more, but also they can talk more. And so they could say, I feel X. And so it's like the moment I hear, I feel sad, angry, frustrated, I mean, immediately it's like, oh, okay, that really sort of hits me a little bit more. Um, so I'd say that has been really helpful. Now, then my own work has been trying to identify both why I do that, which I think has a lot to do with control. Um, uh, Two, what I recognized for myself was, in moments like that, I can catastrophize,
Mm.
say, gosh, this is never going to end, or oh my gosh, they are going to be unable to regulate their emotions for life.
Yes, the extrapolation of
That's right.
yeah, yeah.
And the irony here is, like, I'm not, like, it's pretty humorous when you think about it, right? Like, I'm sitting here worrying about something that I don't do myself. So, yeah. So I think seeing those two things and then putting in place in my habit chart a muscle to build, which was every day is like, hey, where did I feel, sort of some dysregulation bubbling up? And then what were the themes of that? And they typically came down to some version of like, couldn't control it and kind of wanted to get something done, right? Like time constraint or some time constraint I created, or
Mhm.
that may have been real. Um, and so building the muscle around identifying my own emotions has been helpful. Um, yeah, it's been really helpful. And I can say it to the girls now, like, oh, I notice I'm feeling frustrated. And I think the thing that's going on for me is, I really want us to get to this thing on time. A value of mine is being, on time. And, I do less of this is not a big deal, you know? uh, but I mean, I'm saying that it's evolving. Uh, I still have a lot of ways to evolve in that.
I know, but I love it. Like, I mean, who would have thought, right? I mean, as coaches, we we are focused on like the feelings and um the motivations of the people that we're working with. But who would have thought, like, as adults, we'd be identifying like what feelings that we have in a moment, what feelings are underneath those feelings, how they're connected to how we're going through this whole process in order to be better fathers,
Mm.
right? And
Yeah.
like I
Okay.
didn't start that process with my spouse. I only started it with my child.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like this developmental stage that I'm going through now, and it makes me feel very vulnerable,
Mm.
because like I'm trying to teach them, and I'm flying the plane and building it at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really interesting. And you said something interesting about like, it might come from control, but for me, I think a lot of the way I react comes from what was modeled to me.
Mm.
Right. So
Okay.
from my childhood, and then also what I just never learned. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. It's a good point you bring up. I mean, I similar to me for me as well, in that that was what was modeled for me. Also, I think what is interesting is I played tennis growing up, played in college, and one of the things I find about the sport, which is amazing, is that you learn to I don't know if you saw this talk that Roger Federer gave at Dartmouth, the commencement speech. He said, he won 80% of his matches. This is one of the greatest players who ever played. Won 80% of his matches, but only won 54% of his points that he ever played. So part of the point he was trying to make was like, you have to let go of the past, right? You lose a point, it's just a point. You got to stay in the present, right?
Be a goldfish. That's the
That's right. Be a goldfish.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so um it's one of the things I think you can do in tennis, I think, as you get evolved. But what is more likely in junior tennis, at least, is like you kind of suppress the emotion because you're frustrated, but you got to play this next point. So you are building the muscle of just moving forward. But it doesn't mean that you're moving forward without the damage of sort of residual crap that you're holding inside yourself. And so when I noticed, and I didn't get frustrated in the court too much, but when I did, it was like I was so angry, and I didn't learn sort of how to sort of let go and move on, right? And so, I mean, in some senses, you could say you can't move on without letting go, but just for illustration purposes, that's not something I learned. So I think that doubled down on my. You said something interesting about spouse, about like, hey, not learning with spouse. I don't know if this is the same for you, Jeff, but I felt like Ami and I have been able to communicate, right? Because we were both adults. And so the processing I could have before coming back to her on something, like, it was didactic, right? Whereas I found with the younger kids, because the communication really isn't there, right? Their brains haven't developed as much, right? And I'd argue some of us adults, maybe our brains haven't developed. But I found that significant. That was more of an impetus. I would like to say, it's because I just care more with my kids. I imagine that's true too. Like, we care, or see these young kids, whereas you view your spouse as very self-sufficient. But I wonder if, like, it was almost more of a forcing mechanism, because it's not that you can, with kids, you can't do it. You can't do it. It has to be you with yourself.
Yeah, I mean, they're a blank slate, right? So, and also, like, you see them emotionally dysregulated, and I mean, when I saw how there would be times when my youngest in particular would have temper tantrums, and this was now, many years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I would be like, oh my God, like, that is me, right? And to see that mirror, I'm not going to see that mirror in my spouse, no matter how much I screw up. Right. And that's when it was like, and that's when and so it was kind of like a two-step where I was like, oh my God, that's me. Oh my God, I got that from what I saw. Whoa, I really need to stop. Right. And that leads to the next thing that, like, I think is hard for a lot of ambitious dads, how hard we are on ourselves. I mean, when I screw up with my kids, you're just talking about it, like, be like Federer or be like a goldfish. It's easier said than done. And partly because none of us are talking to other dads, first of all.
Yeah. Which is why I love what you're doing. I mean, you are creating the space for that to happen. So really
thank you.
Amazing for you. Like,
no, I appreciate it.
And dads were involved with you.
Well, and it brought up in my mind, there was one father on one of my programs, in the Founding Fathers program, and he dropped his baby, and I don't know if he dropped him or he fell off the couch. Probably the fell off the couch, and like half of the fathers in there were like, "Oh yeah, like that." And I immediately too. I was like, "Oh, that totally happened." Like, he's at month like 7 or 8, where he's just starting to roll, but for him, until he said that out loud, he thought he was the worst dad ever.
Yeah.
right? And it was like, no, 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 welcome to the club.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's
This
right.
is head drop number one, right? And so it's just really like, I don't know if you have any other techniques you use to let go, but like for me it's just like talking to another dad. And
Yeah.
sometimes it doesn't work with your co-parent, sometimes it does, because they're as emotionally invested, so they'll be like, I can't believe like you left them on the couch, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what
That's right.
what have what have you found, if anything, that you do?
Yeah. I like yourself or all others, I can be hard on myself. Yeah, so I don't know if this is cultural, like meaning not just my culture, but meaning cultural in our sort of environment. But looking at the gap is always more conditioned than like seeing what progress you're making, right?
Mhm.
Like why would you know how to be a father? Why would you know? There's like zero like, and we know that rationally, but there's some like weird talk that we have, right? The like Jim Lair will call it the private voice, right? Like let's see. So the community, like you said, with friends is a big thing. Like actually at our school, what's been cool is sort of I created a group for or in our school sort of dads to get together, and like we get together once a month, and then I have a group of dads that we do like a biking and hiking trip, and we sort of go out each
Mm.
week or something. And a lot of it is around, yes, connection with other men, but what inevitably comes up are these versions of like how we could be better, and it is helpful. And I imagine what you experience like sort of with this group, and when you and I talked, I was like, oh my gosh, I felt a weight, and the weight went down because I felt a higher level of accuracy of like what's actually going on versus what's in my head.
Yeah.
And so the letting go is certainly been it's hard. um the reason I said control earlier is because I found like when I'm hard on myself, I kind of like go through a journal exercise of asking myself like what is it I'm attaching this to, and it ends up like I'm attaching it to some version of like me, I'm bad if I do this, like, right? Like, and then if I ask the question, hey, if my buddy Jeff were telling me this, what would I tell Jeff? It turns
Hmm.
out it would be completely the opposite, right? And so I think that exercise is helpful, but for me, talking it out like this is probably
Yep.
more helpful.
I get it. That's great. So tell me, what is the biggest thing you're sitting with about your children right now? Is there like a big question, maybe related to where they are in their development, or how you're gonna turn a trip with kids into an actual vacation? You know, the joke, like it's not a
Yeah,
vacation,
yeah.
it's just yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for the trips we'll be taking this summer. Probably sitting with a few things. One of them is aligned with what we were just talking about, which is where am I trying to um, influence the narrative versus just enjoying the ride with them.
Hmm.
Um, uh, so that would sort of be one. Uh,
Talk a little bit more about what you mean by the narrative.
yeah. So I'm like, oh, we should be doing this with the girls, or oh my gosh, we should get them in these activities. And it's like, why? I don't, I'm not entirely sure why, other than the fact that it creates more stress and there's some random voice in your head saying that that's what we could do. I think one of the gifts that I had in my family was there was a lot of things I didn't love, but my parents saw that I loved tennis and they were like, okay. And as immigrant parents, like that was not normal to say, like, okay, you like this thing, let's fuel that fire, right? And so I feel like some version of how do you accept who they are, and then how do you fuel their fire? If I could live by those two things, having some faith forward that uh, that produces their own sense of self. And as our mutual dear friend Ashish talks about self-efficacy, and and you all talk about it today, right? Like this is, to me, this is like uh, for me, I think that's what I sit with a lot, which is like, where am I trying to uh, over engineer?
I love that. Yeah. God, that's so great to be sensitive to that. And I run into that in all sorts of different respects too, since we're in Spain, but when we go back to the US and then I see kids his age, both my boys' age, playing this sport or that sport or doing this and that. And it was funny. I wanted to sign them up for gymnastics. I was a gymnast, an elite gymnast all the way through college.
Wow.
And I contacted the gymnastics place here, and they're like, "Oh no, you can't even do it before you're like 6 or 7." And I was like, we've already shipped kids out to work in elite training centers at that age. And
Yeah,
so it's just like, I love that the narrative gets challenged. Um, but, um, but it's hard because sometimes that narrative is in our head for lots of different reasons, right? From
absolutely. And I think the question when you ask, I'm sitting with, is like, when is that narrative coming from a place of something external, right? Like, and again, I think it's hard to separate often, the external will always influence you. So I think it's a little pipe dreamish to say that you're going to be fully, like, sort of internally driven. And I don't think that's real, at least, for most of us. Uh, and so the question is like, kind of like what you talked about earlier around intent, when something happens on the manners, right? On the looking in the eye, it's like, in that moment, it's coming from a place that's external and not really, really internal, right? And so knowing when I'm seeking something because it has a narrative that I want it to fit, right? Versus, and I don't know that I've seen that play out well for. It creates more stress for us, like more logistics. Like, I'm not sure. So then, what am I doing this for? Or what are we? I doing this for?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's an element of just human nature in it, right? Like we're constantly comparing, right?
We're
But
conditioned.
conditioned to do it, and in some cultures and some cities and some places, it's stronger than in others. Um, it's a very interesting thing to be aware of, and in addition to what you just said too, just noticing, like, it's hard to, when you love your kids so much, recognize that their interests are completely going in the opposite direction than, like, maybe what your hobbies or passions are, and
Mhm.
to embrace it, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
yeah, I'm gonna go sit in on like the next chess tournament, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
that was not something that I was into, and my son is loving it.
That's so cool. Wow.
Yeah, and like, I would love him to play more soccer. Also
Yeah,
because we're in Spain.
yeah,
But that's not his passion, right?
yeah.
So those are the things that's also about, like, a little bit about letting go, and also about like that narrative that you talked about. Very interesting point. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is again easier, all easier said than done. I mean, the conditioning is there, right? Have a bunch of outcomes, get good schools, good grades, good jobs, and that looks like this narrow band of of good. Um, and I don't know. I look at our parents' age, and I say, gosh, if you're asking them, they say enjoy the ride, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and I recognize that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Like, you want to have some guardrails or something with which you want to be able to raise your kids. But I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of time that we can easily spend planning, right? And scheming, versus like, just going with the ride.
Yeah.
You
I
know.
hear that. What advice would you give to other dads that are trying to figure out how to balance or excel in what they're building from a career perspective and what they're building from a family perspective?
Yeah, I mean, uh,
Only easy questions.
I'm not sure I could, I'm qualified to give any advice here. But if I had to share what what I think can be helpful for all of us, certainly myself included, I I, I think the ability to get clear on what great looks like for yourself across the dimensions um, of your life. And like when I say clear, not I want to be a good dad, but what does a good dad look like? Walk
Mhm.
me through the narrative of what a good dad looks like on any given week. And how does that person spend time with their
Yes.
kid? When you want excellent career, like what does that actually look like? What are you doing? If you're at a company, what level are you at? And like what are you willing to trade off? So there's like a clarity. And I think the second is a commitment. And the commitment is like, if you put that pen to paper on calendar, what are you willing to trade off? Because I think if you looked at a 10 across various things, given the seasons of life and, those few years that you have those kids at home, um, there are trade-offs and you're never going to get to it all. So I think some level of what are you committing to? And it doesn't have to be a commitment for the next 5 years, but can you try this for the next 30 days? And then can you come back to it? So maybe the third would be how do you have better connection both with yourself and with others? And with yourself is shifting that voice uh, from sort of problems to progress, right? And saying like, hey, can I balance seeing problems but also knowing what progress I'm making? um and then you know can I do what something like you, Jeff, are so wonderfully modeling and bringing so many of us together? Uh, can I have a community to be able to share this with in an open way where it's safe? I know I won't feel like less of a man or whatever that means.
Right.
So I think those three things might be useful. But starting with, I don't know that we could actually do any of this if we're not crystal clear on who it is we want to be and what it is what the outcomes we want are.
I think that's beautifully said. I talk a lot about we have strategic plans at work and we don't have them for our parenting
Yeah.
and a vision for who we want to be. So that's great. Always want to end, fatherhood is anything if it's not humbling. So do you have a ridiculous poop story or something crazy that is that you take out, a few beers in when you're meeting up with a bunch of other parents?
Yeah. I, uh, I imagine if I sat here and thought about it, there's probably plenty of poop stories, but the one that comes to my mind was uh, going over to a friend's house, and our older one was, I don't know, she might have been like 4 or 5 months then, and it was so cute, and we're hanging out, and I'm kind of like playing with her, swinging her over around. She just has a diaper on, like nothing else. Like, sometimes kid goes in the diaper and it's just like warm, right? You're like, okay, I got to change this. I'm going like this, and I literally, it's like I didn't realize I'm like splattering around in my buddy's house because it was like I didn't even notice it was all over my arm. And I was like, oh my God, it was disgusting. And I was like looking at his house, I was like,
God, I hope he had kids.
yeah, oh yes, thankfully he had kids. Thankfully he had kids. Uh, we were joking with another buddy of ours who has all this expensive art in his house. I was like, man, if we did this at your house, that probably wouldn't be so great.
I love it. Yes. The stuff that before I was a parent, I mean, I could cringe. I thought I was impressive that I never wiped a diaper before I had kids. And now like I'll wipe anybody. So like, yeah, it
It's
changes.
good.
Parenting
It's good. It's
changes
good.
you. Yeah. Well, Prakash, thank you so much. This has been really fun, and you've been really, really honest and vulnerable about, what fatherhood is, which is kind of constantly pushing back against um, external expectations, against our own unfair expectations, and just working hard to model right and be the best dad that we can be. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. I just love what you're doing, Jeff. It's I think probably any of us who connect with you on this feel grateful to you for doing so.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. All right. Well,
All right,
that's
my
the end
friend.
of our podcast for today.
I love it. We'll see you soon.